Hello and welcome to my channel. I am Brent Bowers and this is My Money. Now, financial technology has seen a fair amount of growth in the mobile application sector. We're talking about banking, investment management, property management, trading platforms, so on and so forth, and it's growing by the month, which is awesome. That's fantastic. Personally, I only use a handful of them. Of course, I'm going to be saving that topic for another video. One of my all-time favorites has got to be Acorns. I use Acorns on a daily basis, and I've been using them for about 4 years now. The reason why I like Acorns so much is because of its simplicity and what I use the app for. Now, I'm not going to go into a deep dive and go into the pros and cons of Acorns, but I am very, very anxious to talk about the portfolio that I use and its surprising uprise during the last year, especially during the Corona crash. Now, some of you, if not most of you, already know that last year provided a lot of new investors the opportunity to get into the market at a discount. Of course, the market has been anything but normal, especially my Acorns accounts, which kind of gave me the idea to do an analysis of my holdings and find out why it's doing so well. As you probably know, that some sectors are doing well and some aren't. Now, without digressing too much about Acorns, which I will be doing another video on completely, I only use the app for 3 main reasons. Number 1, automation. Number 2, roundups. And 3, ETF options. So number 1, automation is exactly as it sounds. You can actually link your bank account to make periodic investments into your Acorns funds on a daily basis, a weekly basis, a monthly basis. It can be $1, $10, $100, $1,000. The reason why you do this is use the dollar cost averaging philosophy, which I employ in my investments overall. So it allows the user to just be out of sight, out of mind with their investments and continuously invest into their portfolio at any one given moment in time. They can scale it back so it's nice and easy. They can be aggressive with it. You can do automation. You can set that up with Acorns. So number 2 is, of course, the roundups. Very, very similar to what Bank of America did back in 2005, where you would link your main bank card or your check card, your debit card, whatever it is you want to call it. And if you would use it, they would round up to the nearest dollar and then transfer that change into a keep the change fund or to a roundup. And once that roundup gets to $5, they would then purchase a fractional share of the portfolio, which I thought was really cool. It made a lot of sense to me back when I was a B of A customer in 2005. And so once I saw that with Acorns, it was a thumbs up for me. And lastly, the ETF options. The reason why I like ETF more so than just mutual funds is because ETF actually has the capability of being very, very diversified, number 1, very cheap, and number 2, it mirrors an actual index. So that's why I like Acorns. If we look into my holdings specifically, I have the most aggressive portfolio that Acorns has, which is exclusively 100% stocks. Now, of course, they have a range from aggressive, moderately moderate, moderately conservative, and conservative, all of which are structured a bit like this. Their risk tolerance therein is contingent upon how many bonds and stocks there is in the mix. But that doesn't really tell us how well the portfolio is performing. But we actually can, because ETFs are actually mirrored index funds, which means they mirror an index, an actual index. For example, the S&P 500, the Russell 2000, the NASDAQ, the Dow Jones, so on and so forth. So we can actually focus in on that specific ETF and find out the asset mix and companies within that ETF to see how those companies are performing. Unfortunately, I don't have enough time to do the entire portfolio because that's thousands and thousands of companies, and I just simply don't have enough time to do a deep dive into all of them. Only the ones that I think are most relevant to the last year specifically. The only thing that's left to do now is hop over to one of my favorite finance research websites of all time after this sweet, sweet directional blur transition. Firstly, we have the bulk of the portfolio sectioned here, which represents 55% of the total aggressive portfolio, which is actually an ETF that mirrors the S&P 500. You might have heard of it, you might not have, called VOO. Now, and since it does track the S&P 500 index, that means there's a lot going on here. But the interesting thing to note is the amount of companies involved in the S&P 500, specifically this ETF VOO, because it does incorporate a lot of powerful players that I think had a large contribution to how well this portfolio actually performed. We're talking about Apple, Microsoft, Google, Facebook, Netflix, Johnson & Johnson, and several other companies. Now, of course, I wouldn't be making this video if I didn't say I have my theories about why certain sectors did so well and others not so well. As an example, take Apple and Microsoft, which are both in the technology sectors, which represents 24% of this actual ETF. Okay, so how does that affect performance? Well, like a lot of other businesses going through the same thing, the technology sector actually had a lot going for it, especially trying to navigate through the restrictions after the COVID crash. And of course, would attempt to stall things in their supply chain, in their project management, and their sales. Technology sector was actually overcome several of these obstacles. One example that I believe helped contribute to the success of companies within this ETF was the ability to have their staff work remotely, as technology companies were already well equipped to have their staff work from home, as a lot of companies out there didn't have the ability to have their staff work remotely. So physical buildings and retail stores didn't really hamper their operations too much. As the COVID requirements are unfortunately still relevant in 2021, last year specifically, one of the main concerns was the adaptability of businesses to have their staff work remotely, all while meeting productions and sales goals. I only say this because working from home would be a lot harder without the technology of video conferencing and video software that manages production and workflow and communications and virtual meetings and setups. You see, working from home would be a lot more efficient if they actually had the means to do it. Furthermore, people were actually turning towards technology more so than they ever have, simply because they use it for social interactions and virtual hangouts and communication. I believe tech companies were able to do this very, very successfully because of digital collaboration tools and communications such as Microsoft Teams, especially if they employed services in other businesses that streamline into both these companies' supply chain, companies like Qualcomm, Intel, even Samsung. Another area making a significant impact on this ETF are the financial services sectors that make up about 14% of this ETF, the biggest of which are Berkshire Hathaway and JP Morgan Chase. Now, I'm not going to get into these companies specifically and do a deep dive, that would take too long, but the financial services sector, much like the technology sector, was also well equipped to handle changes from this corona crash, communications, stay-at-home orders, and workflow capabilities. However, it is important to note that during this time, a lot of people were clamoring about their investments, their savings, their checking, their rent, their mortgages. People were trying to stay in touch with their financial services provider, their retirement companies, so on and so forth, which kind of proved that companies of this nature, even though they were more than equipped to handle the requirements of the corona crash, need assistance too. But even something more important is to understand the financial atmosphere in today's society. There's been a large leap in technology advancements. Just like the first thing I said when making this video, is there's been mobile applications, investment apps, online banking, and it really isn't the same as it was 10, 5, 15 years ago. You don't even have to open up your own bank account by going to a brick and mortar bank. You can actually do it online. So the technology has shifted very dramatically. Further still, preventative measures actually took the front lines during the crash as people moved more towards mobile application money transferring apps such as Venmo, and more specifically, the digital trendy wallet services like Apple Pay, Google Pay, and Samsung Pay. Now, rounding out the top 10 on this ETF list are companies that have had to adapt pretty dramatically and rapidly to the increased demand for their products and services, companies that are in the communication and consumer cyclical sectors. Businesses in the communication sectors like Google, Facebook, Netflix, Disney, Comcast, Verizon, so on and so forth. Now, during the eye of the pandemic, a lot of businesses in this sector were in high demand, and as such were very adaptable to the change for the better. You see, a lot of the times businesses were had to adapt to the stay-at-home orders, and in certain cases, certain rare cases, even a curfew. Okay, so what does that show us about the performance? An important thing to answer that question is a lot of the times most of us were homebodies, and homebodies are going to entertain themselves in one form or another. And they're going to do this by watching more movies, streaming services, Netflix, using the internet more, and byproducts of staying at home and being bored, basically. I'm definitely not suggesting that these businesses within the communication sector weren't without their downsides. They certainly did have a few hurdles to overcome. More specifically, companies like Facebook and Google, they did have corporate offices. However, a lot of their business is done online. Same thing with Netflix, same thing with YouTube. Another example is the fact that Disney actually had to close down their parks during the pandemic. However, most of their services were offset because Disney actually had their business operations tied into global entertainment services like Hulu. Even back then, Hulu was super popular even before the pandemic. And Netflix, of course, saw a massive usage in popularity as it currently still does. So offices in the communication sector weren't too bothered by the shutdown because a lot of their operations were diversified in global operations. And lastly, let's not forget about the one powerhouse in the consumer cyclical area of this ETF, the elephant in the room, Amazon. Store shut down, you can't find what you're looking for, no problem, this place has everything. Now, a lot of the other companies very similar to Amazon do have a brick and mortar but warehouses that they have to overcome certain things and requirements. However, it was offset by a massive increase in willingness by their workers and the C-suite levels to keep operations going, as well as supporting a massive usage in e-commerce. I have decided not to cover the other areas of my portfolio just yet because this video would be way too long, but the second runner up to this portfolio is the IXUS ETF, which is about 30% of the total holdings. Total international stock market is, of course, the main index. Most notable names there are going to be Toyota, Samsung, Nestle, Alibaba, and of course Taiwan Semiconductors. This year has shown us a large degree of arbitrage, especially with the GameStop saga, which I think is still going on, and of course a lot of the crypto crash. But it is what it is. Stonks are going to stonks with no clear end in sight. And that's all I have for you guys today. If you like the video, go ahead and hit the like button as much as possible. And if you want to see videos more like this one, consider being a subscriber. I'm Brent Bowers, and this is My Money. I will see you guys in the next one.